What if I told you that the history you've been taught about humanity's origins is incomplete? That there's a chapter written in stone, whispered in ancient texts, and encoded in the very bedrock of civilization that's been systematically hidden from view? Please subscribe and hit that notification bell right now, because what you're about to discover will shake everything you thought you knew about biblical history and the true nature of our world. They walked the earth before the flood. Beings of such immense size and power that their very existence threatened to corrupt the entire human race. The Bible calls them Nephilim. Ancient texts describe them as giants. But here's what most people don't realize: this isn't mythology. This isn't allegory. And the evidence of their existence didn't vanish with the floodwaters. It's still here, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to look. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Most people skip right over these verses. They're uncomfortable. They don't fit into neat theological boxes. But listen carefully to what the scripture actually says. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Let that sink in. The sons of God, not the sons of Adam. The sons of God, coming down and producing offspring with human women. And the result? The Nephilim, the fallen ones. Giants who would become the stuff of legend across every ancient civilization on earth. Now, here's where it gets fascinating, because this isn't just a Genesis story. The Nephilim appear again and again throughout Scripture. Numbers 13 describes the Israelite spies returning from Canaan, terrified, saying, "We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Grasshoppers. Think about the scale they're describing. These weren't just tall people. These were beings of truly gigantic proportions. And who was Goliath? A descendant of the Nephilim bloodline, 9 feet tall, wearing armor that weighed over 120 pounds, wielding a spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam. But here's what most Sunday school lessons leave out: Goliath wasn't alone. 2 Samuel 21 describes not one, not two, but multiple giant warriors, all descendants of Rapha in Gath. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits in total. The Bible is giving us specific, detailed, physical descriptions of these beings, but it goes deeper. Much deeper. The Book of Enoch, removed from most modern Bibles but referenced directly in the Book of Jude, provides explicit details about what happened. It describes how 200 angels, called Watchers, descended to Mount Hermon. They made a pact, knowing what they were about to do was forbidden. They took human wives and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, weapons of war, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, and secrets that were meant to remain hidden. Their offspring, the Nephilim, grew to enormous size, 300 cubits tall according to some ancient texts. That's 450 feet. Now, whether that's literal or symbolic hyperbole, the point is clear: these beings were unnaturally, terrifyingly large. The global pattern. And here's what makes this absolutely undeniable: every single ancient civilization has legends of giants. The Greeks called them Titans. The Norse called them Jotun. The Hindus described the Daityas. The Native Americans spoke of the Sitecah. The Aztecs remembered the Quinametzin. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from Egypt to Easter Island, every ancient culture preserved stories of giant beings who walked the earth in the distant past. Are we really supposed to believe this is just coincidence? That every civilization independently invented the same myth? Or is the simpler explanation that they're all describing the same historical reality from different cultural perspectives? The archaeological evidence is staggering, and yet it's been systematically suppressed. Newspaper reports from the 1800s and early 1900s are filled with discoveries of giant skeletons across North America. The Smithsonian received hundreds of these specimens. So where are they now? Why have they vanished from public record? In 1894, the New York Times reported the discovery of giant remains in a burial mound. In 1912, the Lovelock Cave in Nevada yielded red-haired giant mummies, corroborating Native American oral histories. Time and again, evidence emerged, was reported, and then disappeared into the vaults of institutions that control the narrative of human history. But let's talk about why this matters beyond just historical curiosity. Because the Nephilim weren't just physically giant. They represented something far more sinister: a corruption of the human bloodline. Genesis 6, verse 3 tells us that God said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal, their days will be 120 years. Why would God need to set this limit? Because something was corrupting humanity at a genetic level. The Nephilim weren't just living among humans. They were breeding with them, creating hybrid bloodlines that threatened to eliminate pure human DNA entirely. This is why the flood had to come. This is why God told Noah to build an ark. Genesis 6, verse 9 provides a crucial detail that most people overlook. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. But the Hebrew word translated as blameless is tamim, which also means without blemish or genetically pure. Noah wasn't just morally righteous. His bloodline was uncontaminated. He was fully human in a world where that was becoming increasingly rare. The flood wasn't random divine anger. It was a surgical strike against a demonic corruption that had spread across the entire planet. Every living thing that breathed air was destroyed, except those on the ark. The Nephilim hybrids, the corrupted animals, the twisted genetics, all of it had to be wiped clean so humanity could start again with uncorrupted seed. After the flood. But Genesis 6, verse 4 contains 5 words that change everything, and also afterward. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. After the flood. How? Either some of the watchers repeated their sin, or the corruption had already spread into certain human bloodlines before the flood, carried through in ways we don't fully understand. Either way, when the Israelites arrived in Canaan, the giants were there waiting. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, Og, king of Bashan, whose bed was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, made of iron because normal beds couldn't support him. This is why God commanded the Israelites to completely destroy certain Canaanite peoples. Not because God is cruel or genocidal, but because these weren't fully human populations. They carried Nephilim genetics, and allowing them to survive would restart the same corruption that necessitated the flood in the first place. This is spiritual warfare at the most fundamental level. This is the preservation of humanity itself. And here's the question that should terrify you: are they still here? Revelation 12 describes a war in heaven, with Satan and his angels being cast down to earth. Matthew 24 warns of the days of Noah returning before Christ comes back. Jesus himself said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." What was happening in the days of Noah? The corruption of human genetics through fallen angelic beings. Are we seeing signs of this now? The obsession with transhumanism, genetic engineering, human-animal hybrids, artificial intelligence merging with human consciousness. Are these modern attempts to do what the Watchers did in the ancient world? To corrupt, to blend, to create something that is no longer fully human and therefore no longer eligible for redemption through Christ's sacrifice? The Nephilim story isn't a side note in Scripture. It's central to understanding the entire cosmic conflict between God and Satan. Satan's strategy has always been corruption. In Eden, he corrupted human obedience. Before the flood, he corrupted human genetics. At Babel, he corrupted human unity and scattered the nations under the authority of lesser divine beings, the sons of God who became the gods of the pagan nations. Throughout history, fallen powers have worked to build kingdoms and systems that oppose God's plan. And God's response? He chose one man, Abraham, from whom would come a nation, Israel, through whom would come the Messiah, fully human and fully divine, who would crush the serpent's head and restore what was lost. The entire Old Testament is the story of God preserving this bloodline against constant spiritual and physical attack. Every attempt to destroy Israel, every intermarriage with pagan peoples carrying corrupted genetics, every giant warrior standing in the way was part of Satan's strategy to prevent the coming of Christ. Closing, the truth matters. So why has this been hidden? Why do modern churches avoid teaching about the Nephilim? Because it doesn't fit the comfortable, sanitized version of Scripture we prefer. Because it reveals that the Bible describes a reality far stranger and more supernatural than we're comfortable admitting. Because it means spiritual warfare isn't just metaphorical. It's genetic. It's physical. It's happening in dimensions we can barely comprehend. The giants were real. The Nephilim walked the earth. Their corruption necessitated divine judgment on a global scale. And the same spiritual forces that drove that ancient rebellion are still at work today, using different methods but pursuing the same goal: the corruption and destruction of humanity. This is the truth they don't want you to know. This is the history that's been systematically erased from academic discourse and downplayed in modern theology. But the evidence is there in Scripture, in ancient texts, in archaeological anomalies, and in the consistent testimony of every ancient culture on earth. The question isn't whether the giants existed. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, what does their existence mean for us today? And are you brave enough to follow this truth wherever it leads, even when it shatters everything you thought you knew? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this truth. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started uncovering the hidden history of the Christian empire. The truth is stranger, darker, and more glorious than you ever imagined.